or seeing the reaction when you're clearly the worst in the class and everyone is nice, but you can see in their eyes that they're like, oof, like this guy's a long way to go. Like that's kind of stuff kind of excites me, so um, that sort of makes, and then at that time, not always was I able to accept the frustration because that's something you kind of have to learn, right? Like as a professional, now I know, and I hate saying the word, referring to myself as professional, but hopefully you know what I mean. Like as a working artist, so um, now I know that the frustration is part of it. But back when you're studying, you're just thinking like, I suck, I can't do this, I don't have what it takes. But there's these little moments I remember at CDA where it's just frustration. I hate this. I was just having the worst time drawing. And then there's this tiny little thing, this little thing where maybe one little sketch you get right, and it gives like this little sliver of hope or something where you're like, maybe I can do this, And then you get for the first time, your teacher says like, oh, this looks pretty good. And you're like, oh my God, like I'm improving, like, and then later looking back on it, you realize all that time I've been super frustrated is actually the time where I'm learning.
Please welcome today's guest and Learn Square's newest instructor, the wonderful Wouter Gort. Wouter is a concept designer with a list of clients that include the likes of Eidos Montreal, DreamWorks Animation, Bungie, and many more. If you're familiar with his work, then you'll know he's an exceptional artist and designer. Whether it's characters, props, keyframes or vehicles, you name it, and he's probably done it. All this versatility comes from a modern and bulletproof workflow, which Wouter actually teaches in his Learn Squared course, Designing Better Characters, which is available now. In this episode, we learn more about Wouter's course and the journey that led him to teaching, plus so much more, including why Star Wars The Phantom Menace is probably the best Star Wars film. Buckle up and let's go. Hey everybody, welcome to the Learn Squared podcast, and we have today's guest, Wouter Gort.
Hi everyone.
Welcome, Wouter. So you're here today, and we're obviously going to cover many things, but the key thing we're going to cover is, at the time of recording, what's actually arriving tomorrow, which is your Learn Squared course, your first Learn Squared course, Designing Better Characters.
Yeah, man. I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about it.
That's
it's been
cool.
a while in the making, so
yeah. How long have you been working on that?
Oh man. Well, I guess at first I was like, should I say? But then the class sort of reveals itself because at a certain point in the class, when I talk about Blender, I talk about 2.8 just being out.
Yeah.
And like we're at like 2.92 or something now. So I started it somewhere in 2019 actually, but then like work and just it just was a lot of work too to do it and to what I think at least just to do it properly. So but yeah, it's been really fun to do as well,
Yeah, like one of the privileges of working here is you get to see a lot of the courses before they come out. And one thing you is definitely evident is the amount of work that's gone into it. And obviously I've only seen the edited clips. So I can imagine just the raw content and hours you put into it. Must have been insane. But then at the same time as putting my artist hat on and seeing the value that I've already gotten just from watching the course and how I can adapt it to my workflow is, I just can't wait to see the kind of work and how people will execute their ideas based on the workflow you give. So like, I guess if you want to give a quick summary on the course itself and how it can benefit people, like why should people take this course?
Sure. I mean, I really like it because basically in this class, I go through all of my workflow. So it's a character design class. And I would also say it's pretty heavily a prop design class because all of lesson 3, for example, lesson 3 out of the 4 lessons, one lesson is dedicated to props entirely. And we're actually doing 3 different props. and all of those props, for example, are done using different workflows, and so are the characters. So I basically give my full range of workflows that I use, exactly like that for my clients. For all my client work,
Mm.
I use the workflows that we're going through in this class. And it's not just the workflows for me. For example, lesson one, we talk a lot about the idea itself, and the concept. That part is also very important to me, like how to actually approach, you know, coming up with an interesting concept for something, because that's basically our job, right?
Mm.
The execution stage has to be up to a level where you can communicate to the client and where you can convince them to go with your idea. But it's still about the idea, we're still concept artists. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, we go over all of that. So I'm really happy about that. I think it's a complete. You could even apply this, in my opinion, these workflows that we're applying to characters and to props in this class. I use the exact same techniques and workflows when I approach environments or mech design or that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So I think it's pretty broad. So I would
Yeah,
say that's probably the strength of the course. I don't know if you agree, but
100%. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that like it can translate to other things. I particularly specialize in, or my main subject matter of my work is tends to be vehicles. And
yeah,
going through, I can already see that, okay, I'm definitely going to steal that technique for this part and I'm going to use this for that. And that's just on the vehicle side of things. And then, you know, like in terms of as a concept artist, do you think it is wise to nurture a workflow that can be applicable to different tasks you may be given?
I think so. I mean, it's weird because now I'm teaching this character design class, right? And when I started my concept art career, I just couldn't do characters. I couldn't do it.
Mm,
So I was really afraid that they were going to ask it of me. I only did
mm,
also vehicles,
mhm.
and props. It's basically just hard surface design.
Yeah, yeah.
But then you slowly, yeah, I mean, what you say, I think it's true. It's important to get a workflow where you can sort of do everything, even if that means using tricks. I mean, in my class, you'll be
Mm,
seeing a lot of tricks, what I use to get, for example, characters out there. But it's also a thing where, at least for students listening to this, it's something that comes bit by bit, right? Over years. So
mm,
when I started, I couldn't do characters, but then you sort of become a bit better at hard surface design. And then you think I need to branch out, and you learn more stuff to get characters out there. And then it sort of merges into one workflow where you can
mm,
pick and choose what you need to use. But I would say that that's definitely something, at least for me personally, that comes over years. You know what I mean?
mm,
So now I feel comfortable enough that I have a tool set that I can use, or workflows that I can use to tackle whatever they ask. At this point, I don't really care anymore what the job is. If it's a prop or vehicle or character or whatever, it doesn't matter too much to
mhm.
me. But, just a few years ago, if they would ask me for a character, I would have, you know, been really nervous.
Wow.
And that's a nice way of putting it. I would have like, uh, yeah. So, um, that changes, man. I mean, I think it's important, yeah, like you said. But for example, like you said, you're focusing more on vehicles, right? I mean, I've seen you do like your crazy amount of spaceships in September and stuff, which is
Mm,
awesome. Um, I think that is very good to do. And then if you want to do branch out to characters later, you can. But it's good to give each thing its time.
mm.
It's probably a very long-winded way of giving my answer, but
No, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah, that's quite interesting actually that you say with characters that was something that I guess you did last or very late, and you
yeah,
something that you were very afraid of, which is great that you are open to admit that. Not saying that that's something that you shouldn't admit, but I guess with artists and just art in general, there's that huge element of like, I guess, insecurity and imposter syndrome and all that kind of
mhm,
stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And it's quite common, and I've done it in the past where you just kind of avoid topics where you, I guess, mention either weaknesses or deficiencies or sort of things that that you
yeah,
may be quite nervous about. And you mentioned I've actually noticed that in the course as well, where there's like a very honest tone throughout. Like from my perspective, from the moment I saw your work from many years ago until now, like I just thought this guy's a badass. Like this, like the level that I see, this is elite level. So then, you know, you immediately think of that person as being almost, I guess, like bulletproof and like superhero level. And then again, like, you know, with the course, I mean, like with every instructor, like everyone's at a very, very high level. So you always see, you know, when you even hear people speak about, okay, well, you know, this is, you know, like my sketch isn't that great, but then you look at it and you think this is still a million times better than what I could ever do. So you still like gravitate towards what's glamorous. However, you know, like hearing you speak about, oh, I wasn't happy with this, or looking back at it, like almost reflecting on your own work that you just did immediately before recording that audio, that, okay, I'm not liking the look of this. Like that for me was quite insightful in a positive way, as in like, you know, like it's okay to still feel unhappy or not pleased with your work. Is that something that's like you've had throughout, or is that something that's like flared up now and again? Or
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm glad you saw that in the class, because that's one of the main things I wrote down before even starting the classes. I don't like seeing tutorials or lessons where it looks like everything goes perfect. You know, like for me, this job, I mess up all the time. It's a constant struggle. You know, a lot of it isn't fun. I like coming to the end of a project and finishing it. That's great, but it's just a struggle. So I wanted to show that in the class, because for me, it's about how you move past that. You know, it's about the professional. Being a professional, in my opinion, is, you know, you mess up all the time, but you get to a presentable end result within the time frame, you know, within the time limit. So yeah, in this class, you'll see me mess up. Like you mentioned, you'll see me do sketches where I just hate it. But that's the kind of stuff that I want to show you guys, show the students, because it's about how to move past that. You know, like I could cut that out and pretend like everything goes perfect the first try, but it's nonsense. You know, that's not true. So that's something I've always had. It's something I always will have. I'm fine with it. Like that, I guess that's what experience maybe does. I've been doing this for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years at this point. I know as soon as I start a job that as soon as I draw my first line, I think it sucks and I think I can't do this and I'm a phony, you know. But then I also know by now that I expect that feeling and that I just have to push through it, you know. So it's, to me, that's one of the most important lessons, especially, you know, I'm just talking from my perspective, right? But for students, for me to see that with other teachers was so important, to see like, oh, they're human too. They mess up, you know. And I mean, I've been very lucky with teachers that they're like 1,000 times better than me, but even they messed up sometimes during a demo. And even though they were very nervous at that point, for me, it was like a breath of fresh air. Like, oh my God, like, you know, that's normal, you know?
Yeah. And I think
so,
it makes someone relatable. And that is, I think, at least, well, from my opinion, because I'm sure everyone has their own opinions, but just having someone relatable, I guess, almost coming across, well, human, like you said, like, you know, they're going through the same emotions and the same, like, you know, the elements that happen when you're creating, like, you know, the highs and the lows and what have you, and knowing that people, and also that's a feeling that people can relate to, because I guess, like, say, whenever someone's starting out, like when I was starting out, thinking, okay, well, I look at, you know, high level work and think, wow, I'd love to be able to do that. You know, you always think, I wonder what it would feel like to produce something that's so amazing.
Effortless, right?
Exactly.
You think I can wait for it to go effortless?
Yes, and that's the thing. And then you realize over time, and then your whole, like, what you want to feel with your work changes as well. Where it's not, the feeling of effortless is changes, and it's more like a case of how, you know, like, oh, you realize that they went through more of, you know, their journey to get to that, and how did they overcome the anxiety of this, or how did they solve that problem when they weren't happy with their work, and how did they get it over the line to that level? And then when those feelings that you can relate to, like the anxiety side of things and the dread of like, oh my god, I'm going to submit this and hope I'm not going to get destroyed when I get the feedback back and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you realize that the people you look up to have also had those same emotions. Like you can relate to the fact that they've been through that same moment, so you know exactly how they felt. Yet they're still able to produce that level of work. Like that shows that okay, then it is achievable. As opposed to just being like, a superstar skill that, I guess like another field, like maybe like say athletics, where it's all about physicality and things have to be a certain way where that's the only way you can succeed. Maybe that's a bit different where that's almost like if you don't have the ingredients, it's impossible. But at least on the creative side, that it just shows that, okay, it's more achievable than perhaps it didn't feel like before.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, man. Like, and at least for me, this whole thing to get, from being a student to, let's say, a professional, quote unquote, working professional, took years, and it took years in the sense where at first I went, for example, to the United States to study there at this little school called Concept Design Academy. And I remember being in this design class and we had to post up our work on the wall. We had to print it out and put it up on the wall every week. And there was this moment where I came from Holland, in Holland, I was always the kid who drew. So everyone was like, oh, he can draw, And then I went to the States and we had to post up our work. And I was like, oh my God, I'm the worst one by far. Like I suck. And it's like this weird, and I sucked for a long time after that. I mean, I still feel like I suck with a lot of stuff, but at least now I'm confident enough that I can, I'm confident about my work in terms that I know I can work professionally. But it's even from that point, it took years before I got my first job, So it just, this whole thing is just but you are right. It is compared to athletes, we can work at it and keep eliminating, problems that we have or keep eliminating weaknesses that we have and become better and better, which makes it so exciting. But it is frustrating, but then again, I guess it's also like a sort of self, like, I don't know how to put that, like a egocentric suffering. So it's if we mess up, no one else dies. We're not like surgeons or something. So
that's very true.
I like to put it into I don't know how you say that, like relative terms like that as well. And then a little bit of the calm comes back. It's like all of this is so I don't know. It's so again, if we mess up, no one dies. So
that's true.
That's at least good.
I guess like when you play a computer game and you don't get to the next level or achieve your high score, you can just keep going over again. And we don't seem to, although you feel that frustration and you feel that like, oh my God, that this is the worst game ever, or I'm the worst at this game, you still want to keep playing it because it's got that enjoyment element to it. And it's like, do you perhaps feel that sometimes maybe as artists, we forget the enjoyment side of things and maybe get too bogged down in the what we can't do? And like you mentioned as well, the word frustration, which is, again, I guess this not just only applies to artists, anything where you never had that skill nurtured in the first place, and you have to pick up, which is pretty much nearly 99% of all skills humans have to learn anyway. But like, how did you cope with the frustration? Because it can get quite overwhelming at times, especially when you add to the element, things about trying to make a career and then earn a living and then try and make sure that, like when you've earned a living, you don't lose that living, etc., etc. Like, how did you cope with those frustrations?
Well, I think it's a good point you mentioned about like having fun with it, like, I don't know how this is for you, but for me, that's what I'm trying to get back to my whole career, is like that feeling you had drawing when you were a kid, and throughout the class, I think with the assignments and the homework, I keep mentioning to the students, like, just have fun with it, because that's like one of the first things you lose. And if you don't have fun anymore in this job, then I almost feel like there's better jobs out there, to do. If drawing isn't fun anymore, like we were all the kids who enjoyed drawing when we were young, I assume. So, but I feel like it's sort of a balancing act between that and understanding. For me, the frustration part is more like acceptance. I just
Mm.
know that's part of it, and I know that there's not quite like there's not anything quite like finishing a design or finishing a nice illustration
Mm.
where, at least for me, that like the proudness I feel lasts maybe a few hours or like that evening,
Yeah.
and then the next day I'm like, oh, damn it.
Yes.
Um, but the frustration is just like an acceptance where you're like, okay, this is part of it. And for example, a video game will give me more instant gratification, but it won't give me that end, that
Yes.
satisfying feeling of finishing something. And I'm sure you seem to have seem to be very disciplined. Like you did a spaceship for every day, right, for the month of September or something.
Yes. Yes, I did.
Yeah. So how is that in terms of? I'm sure that's frustrating too. Like, could you keep the fun in something like that?
Um, yeah, I'm just going to almost mimic exactly what you just said. It's like
Mhm.
at times it was a case of, oh my God, why did I even start this? It's like it's
Yeah.
2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I go drop my kids after school in like 4 or 5 hours. What am I
Oh,
doing?
man.
I did do like an everyday for a year. I think four
Yeah,
years
I
ago.
remember that. Yeah.
So a lot of that, I guess, stamina I built came from that. So I knew that, okay, you don't get too precious with certain things. Like you just mentioned, it's about, getting the job done. But then
Mhm.
also when you're doing it for yourself, you get to control exactly what you're doing. It's almost a case of, okay, I'm gonna experiment with this, or enjoy this
Yeah.
idea. But then sometimes you fall into an idea which you don't like, but then you realize that you've committed to something, so you just got to release it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But ultimately, it was just a case of I've set myself a target and now I'm going to finish it. But then at the same
Mhm.
time, it's also looking for that flow state where you realize that, okay, I'm in a flow state, and this particular thing I'm creating is just going to be what I'm happy about and what I'm happy with, and that's the most
Yeah.
enjoyable part of creating for me. So I guess it's always like getting that hit again. Okay, this day wasn't great. The day before that wasn't great, but then today, I'm gonna go ahead and hopefully do a great one. And
Yeah.
although it was like 30 days and 30 separate designs, I probably sent maybe 4 or 5 were like actually kind of decent, and maybe of those 2 or 3 were quite good.
Mhm.
But it at the same time, it was a case of, it's just, I guess, as artists, is the things that we do, right? It's we commit to these audacious things, and then we try and match it,
Yeah.
and then realize that we can't match it, and then we just try and keep our heads above water. And then when we completed it, we think, yeah, that is, you almost forget about all those struggles and that pain you had
Mhm.
whilst making it, which in fact, by you mentioning it, just made me remind myself about all those pains. So thank you for that.
You're
Um,
welcome, man.
no, I get your point. It's like, and it's almost like when it comes to creating, and I guess for yourself, I mean, like, when was the last day you didn't make anything, or not even think about making anything?
Yeah, that's been a while ago. Um, but I will have to say that I'm kind of um like last year, for example, 2020, I was busy with work, so I did do work every day. I just really didn't feel like doing personal work.
Mm,
I just didn't feel it. And I see
mm,
all those posts online about true inspiration or blah blah blah. I mean, I
mm.
don't agree with all that stuff. That's just my personal thing. I if last year I just didn't feel like personal work, so I just didn't do it. And I mean, that probably sounds elitist. I was lucky enough to have to have work, to have
Mm.
work incoming. But I'm not that person. If I don't, last year I knew I shouldn't do it because I was going to get stressed out. I
Yes.
was going to get
Yep.
overworked. So I just told myself, you know what, it's fine. I'll do it. I'll do personal work again when I feel like it. And I just almost all year didn't do anything. I didn't feel guilty about it at all. It was great. I still, did creative work because it's my job. So I
Mhm.
did it, 8 to 10 hours a day.
Yep.
And I said to myself, that's more than enough. That's fine. I don't owe anyone, anything. So um, I just need to be able to make a living. So I did that. And to be honest, for me, it was great, man. I mean,
Nice.
now 2021, I'm inspired again. I'm making my own game. I'm
Sick.
excited. I'm doing other stuff like animation. I'm
Sick.
feeling excited again to do my own stuff. So it was worth it. And a lot of this thing we're doing, at least for me, I'm thinking like, it's that whole thing, which I think is nonsense of thinking about if I stop, then someone will pass me or whatever. But
Mm,
I actually got better or got more inspired with ideas by stopping for a while and let
mm,
some rest back into my brain. So I you know I'm 31. I don't know how old you are, but we have to do this for quite a long time. So
yes.
taking a year off, it wasn't even taking a year off. It was taking a year where I still worked, but not did
Yeah.
any work on top of the 8 to 10 hours a day. So in my opinion, that stuff is fine. And actually, now I feel like my personal work might be better, hopefully, because I want to do it.
Mm.
I think it's fun. So um, yeah, that's just my personal view on things. And when I look online, I feel like probably a lot of people would disagree with me, but that's how I feel about it.
I'm actually 100% agree with you. And from my perspective, for me, that was still like you were still creating. It's just that I guess that your reasons for creating were different. Because although you
Mhm.
can easily divide personal work and obviously professional work, you were
Yeah.
still flexing those creative muscles. But then also, I guess when you're working for clients, um, you also, I guess, notice the benefit, or not even just the benefit, the difference between doing your own projects. Um,
Hmm.
but then, it's like I can relate in that sense because before I did that September thing, for most of that year, it was the same. I did zero personal work, and a
Hmm.
lot of the stuff that I had even the year before that, I still hadn't finished. So it was almost like a big like hiatus in terms of personal output from my point of view. And then obviously when I got a chance, that happened. So I guess it was like pent up, or like, just all a
Yeah.
backlog of not being able to do stuff. But then
Yeah.
throughout that time, just like yourself, it did come to the realization that, okay, and this is something that I realized when I was doing the everydays. It was like almost 6 months in, it was like, I'm enjoying this. This is great. But then I also realized that, I'm lacking on certain things, and this is taking up time to
Hmm.
develop those things. So almost that's why I decided that I'm just going to stop after a year. And I could have stopped then. Clearly, I didn't
Yeah.
need to do a year, but for some reason I thought, hey, a year sounds better. But then almost after that, and then having that gap of not doing much, it was like you start to appreciate when you do make stuff. And then you also, I guess, and I don't mean to speak for you, but I guess you also realize that, okay, when I do make something, I want to make it more meaningful.
Yeah.
And I guess that worked out for you because it's gone from, I guess, making a piece to like making huge entire projects in the shape of, I guess, a game and animation.
Hmm.
So like looking back now, and that I guess was forced because of having to work and that taking your time up, and also making that conscious decision to not burn yourself out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Exactly.
like, do you think if you hadn't have made that choice, you'd be doing this game and this animation now? And also, do you think your work has improved as a result?
Um. Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, I feel
Mm,
like if I would have pushed myself throughout 2020 to do personal work just for the sake of it, I might
mm,
have been doing nothing now because I think I would just have gotten burned out,
mm.
like already with work was very busy. So, but, yeah, that's hard to say, but,
Mm.
you know, I don't know if my work's improved. I think it changed. That's what I'm
Yeah.
excited about
Okay.
myself. I mean,
Change slightly.
I'm excited about the change. Like I just started like trying animation and
Mm.
like now I'm trying to learn programming and scripting to get trying to build my own game. I just got a bit, I wouldn't say bored because I enjoy doing it for my work, but at least for personal work I didn't really enjoy just doing a concept piece anymore or
Yes.
a illustration. It just felt flat to me. It just
Mm.
felt not complete enough. I just have certain, and by the way, everything I'm saying, I'm a pretty, like opinionated person. So take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, like feel free to disagree with me on,
Mm.
on everything, of course. But For me, concept art, I was sort of in a mood where, I felt it was not complete enough. I felt I had some issues with it. And in my job, it was fun. But then right now, I'm doing this job where I'm actually I can't say much about it, but where I'm actually allowed to do animation. The person I'm working with just lets me do whatever.
Mhm.
If I want to do animation, he lets me do it. If I want to set up stuff in Unreal and like make little game environments for us to walk through, and I was like, man, as far as concept design goes, this is awesome, because now
Yes.
I can actually see things in motion. I can feel it when I'm walking through an environment. It feels so good and fresh to me. That's why I really love enjoying making my game, because I can work on the different facets,
Sick.
of course it's going to be a very small indie game, but I really enjoy that, like now I don't have to guess if something will work. I can actually sort of figure it out. And I don't know, it's, maybe it gets a bit too far away from concept art, but I really enjoy it. I enjoy
Mm.
branching out a little bit like that. So I would say the work has changed. I don't know, it's hard for me to say if it got better, but I enjoy the
Right.
change.
That's
Yeah.
nice. I mean, like, when did you? Because I guess it's changed forever. I guess since as a kid drawing,
Yeah.
like you didn't, I guess, anticipate wanting to do this as a job and knowing that this was a job. To, I guess, the moment you discovered it was a job, and then now where
Yeah.
you're at right now. I mean, like, when did you first going back? Like, when did you first realize that you just wanted to do something more with art and creativity? And
Mm.
like, when did that moment occur for you? And was there anything major that triggered that, or was it something quite gradual?
Um, you know, to be honest, I think I'm lucky that art is a career field, because I don't know if I would have been able to do anything else. I mean, even in high school, I was just drawing all the time.
Mm,
I barely passed anything else because it just didn't, yeah, I just didn't care, about
mhm.
math and stuff like that. And funnily enough, math now comes back with the programming side. So
Yes.
I'm like, God damn it, like I should have paid more attention, but I mean, that was always kind of going to be the thing. It just changed a lot throughout. Like, for example, when I finished high school, I went to this game design school,
Mm,
um, where they made me do like, it was more like web game programming. They thought I shouldn't be an artist. So I basically just did web game programming there.
mhm,
That was like when I was 18 or something like that. And after that, I thought I wanted to be a fine artist. So I went
mm.
to like art school, and threw paint around and stuff like that, which I hated. So I quit after 6 months. And at that point, I thought, you know what? I don't really like art in museums, like the stuff I can't grab my
Mm,
hands around or grasp. I like commercial art. I love games. I love
mm,
concept art. Like that's the stuff I enjoy. So thought I want to become a concept artist then. So that's when I went to, as I mentioned before,
mhm,
CDA, Concept Design Academy. That was 2011. So like 10 years ago or something.
mm,
And then I got really into, you know, entertainment industry, into concept art,
mhm,
started taking classes there. And that was sort of the turning point for me, where I was like, oh, this is it.
mm, mhm.
So that's, yeah. What about you? Were you always into art?
Yeah, almost similar in the sense that, like, as a kid, from what I've been told, that's the only thing that kept me quiet was just drawing stuff, whether it was on
Yeah.
paper, on walls, or whatever.
Hmm.
And then, it wasn't something that I always, I guess, as I am now, like, it consumes almost, my whole life in terms of,
Yeah.
not just only wanting to do it, but in terms of like the field that I'm in, it's all art based, so it's always think about it every day. Um, but like, I guess in high school, although I did enjoy other subjects, like I particularly enjoyed science and design technology, but it was always art that I gravitated towards the most because, like you said, drawing stuff and expression in that form seemed to be the most comfortable thing.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it was a case of like, how do I get a job from this? Like, coming from an Indian family, it was a case of like, so how do you make this a job? How are you going to make some money? There's always that, like,
Mm.
that conversation that's always had with most kids. So it was a case of, so how do I do this? And then, I did engineering course, dropped out of that because I didn't enjoy it. Then I realized that, okay, you can do, like, I always enjoyed entertainment design, but I didn't know that was a field. So my backup to that was car design. I thought, yeah, that would be cool. And then
that makes sense.
I did transport design at university, but then that didn't turn out the way I anticipated. A lot of that was similar to your experience, where I had a moment as well where it was put your work up on the first day. And I remember trying really hard on that first day to make it not look as bad as I thought it would. And I think that's when my imposter syndrome really kicked into high gear from that moment onwards. And yeah, man, it took me about a few years to actually realize that, this is something that I might not be actually good at and I need to change. But then in the final year, I discovered concept art, that was a thing. In fact, I didn't even discover it was a thing. Someone bought in the book Cosmic Motors by Daniel Simon, and that completely changed everything, because I was doing transport and I had this, and we all have these, like, these fantasies about how a career is going to be when we're younger. Like, yeah, I'm going to work on this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make this thing. And for me, it was a case of, yeah, I'm going to work for a car company, they get so awesome, and then make cars for films. Because at that point in time, you had like the Minority Report, you had the Lexus in there, you had the iRobot Audi car, and all these iconic vehicles. And obviously you got Batmobiles and all sorts. I was like, yeah, that's the way forward. But for some reason in my head, it wasn't a case of like, oh, that's a job that someone can actually train for. I just thought they just selected these standout, awesome people because they were branded cars. I thought, oh, you got to work for these companies to get into that field. But then,
I see. Yeah.
Long story short, I saw that book that completely changed my trajectory. And then ever since then, barring a few hiccups along the way when life gets in the way, it's just been about trying to get into this industry. But enough about myself. No,
that's interesting, man. I love hearing about it.
Oh, thanks. With your journey, like, how was your journey up to the point where I guess you actually, like, that moment when you said, this is it for me, this is what I want to do. What was that journey like in terms of training yourself and the education side? Like, was it always, and I guess you've answered this earlier because you said, there's always been that frustration in terms of your work and overcoming that. But like, what was your mindset at that time? Did you feel like this was something that you wanted to do, or was there a lot of doubt along the way? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how did you know that was the right path to take?
Well, to be honest, I think that this is where I'm lucky that I'm like just a simple guy, because I just like pick something and then I don't really look. I never look back. I just choose something and then I decide that's it. So I just keep things very simple for myself, because I know otherwise it's gonna get too frustrating. I do the same in my work, by the way. I think in my class you see the same thing. I don't do a lot of sketches or like 1,000 thumbnails. I just try to figure the thing out and then finish it. I don't. Otherwise, I know I'm gonna get too confused. So I like concept art. Talking about the point where I started deciding to go to CDA, there was just a feeling I had where I was like, this feels good. So then I made the decision, like, this is it. Like, I'm going to go 100% for this. I tried some other stuff, like, the game design school, the fine arts, that all wasn't it. I felt excited about this. So I was like, this is it, man. And I also, even at CDA, everyone there was great, by the way. But even in my surroundings, there were some people that, clearly showed that that they thought I didn't have what it took, which is not like some sort of sad story, but that sort of stuff, as bad as it is, I'm probably too petty, but that sort of stuff motivated me too. That sort of, you wait and see, like that sort of stupid thing. So I had a little bit of that, which is probably not good, but I was like, you guys wait. Or seeing the reaction when you're clearly the worst in the class and everyone is nice, but you can see in their eyes that they're like, oof, like, this guy's a long way to go.
Oh,
like,
I've been there.
That's kind of stuff kind of excites me, so
yeah.
that sort of makes, and then at that time, not always was I able to accept the frustration, because that's something you kind of have to learn, right? Like as a
Mm.
professional now, I know, and I hate saying the word, referring to myself as professional, but hopefully you know what I mean. Like
Oh, sure.
as a working artist, so um, you know, now I know that the frustration is part of it. But back when you're studying, you're just thinking like, I suck, I can't do this, I don't have what it takes. But there's these little moments I remember at CDA where it's just frustration. I hate this. I was just having the worst time drawing. And then there's this tiny little thing, this little thing where maybe one little sketch you get right, and it gives like this little sliver of hope or something where you're like,
Mm.
maybe I can do this. And then you get, for the first time, your teacher says like, oh, this looks pretty good. And you're like, oh my God, like I'm improving, like,
Yes.
and then later, looking back on it, you realize all that time I've been super frustrated is actually the time where I'm learning, and the time where
Yes.
you're just chilling out and you're doing what you're already used to. You're stagnating. So, which I'm not against, by the way. Again, like what I said before, I don't have that thing where, that constant improving. I
Mm.
care more about like trying to do my best, trying to improve, but also being happy along the way.
Mm.
So, but yeah, I mean, during those school times, you kind of have to dive in deep, and
Mm.
accept the frustration and stuff. I don't know if I even answered your question, but at least I
No,
said
that's all
some
good.
word.
No, I think no, you did, because it's like it's great to get that insight in terms of what your journey was like, and particularly, especially when like you said, it was a case of trying to make those breakthroughs, where you want to get that level that you want to get to, um, and also just I guess the theme of like just keep at it and never stop, because like some people might just nail it on their first try. Others might take like hundreds, even thousands of tries. But the point is, I guess like we mentioned earlier as well, the luxury of um this career, this vocation that we're trying to do, is that you can, providing obviously time's not for we're not guaranteed time, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of it when we don't use it, so you might as well use it. And the more you keep
Yeah,
trying, you can still level up. So
yeah.
um one of the questions I did want to ask you, which I forgot to ask you quite early on, was back to characters, where you mentioned that you weren't initially good at that. Yet looking at your course, it's you are very good at that now. What was a turning point for you when that became something that you where it became like, for me personally, when I see your work, like that's one of the things I define you by as well. Is like when I see
Mm.
this guy's work, I'm gonna see badass characters and badass props that go with it as well.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to hear that that wasn't something that you were proficient at early on.
Yeah, no,
So
no.
when did that become a thing for you?
Um, well, I think a lot of it had to do with me being frustrated with myself that I
Mhm.
can't do it, so I just get annoyed with myself, and then I'm like, I have to figure this out somehow.
Mm,
But also, I just really missed not being able to do that, because for me, a character shows so much. I go over this in my class a lot too. For me, character design is not just cool shapes on a person. It's,
mm,
I want to be that person. If I play a game, I need to be able to want to be that character in the game, or
mm,
if it's an animation, I want that to be the character that I fantasize about when I'm in bed. Like I wish I was
yeah.
that person. So to me, not being able to do that was a huge miss for me, because I have the same issue sometimes with props and vehicle where it becomes too, I don't know. I don't know if you would call it, there's not enough meaning to it, or maybe not
Mm,
enough character or personality. I tried to do that in my props too, but I realized, if you have a character, then you can really, show that character and show personality. So I really
mm,
missed that. So that was kind of like a turning point where I figured I have to figure this out one way or another. And I mean, I use a lot of tricks. I use 3D, I use DAWs to be able to get the job done. Which, in concept art is all fine. But yeah, I think that was it mostly, that I felt like I really missed. I really wanted to express that part of concepting too. I enjoy trying to pretend like I'm the character, and and feeling it out, even though you might not be able to see it in the final drawing, because maybe people listening to this and they're like, "What? Your characters just stand there." But to me, I can sort of see something in them.
Yes.
Like that's just a very personal thing I have with my character.
Mm.
So yeah, that's just a really enjoyable thing. I feel, man, that, and I just miss that. So that's basically when I try to turn it around. Yeah.
Personally, I think that you can see that in not just only the stuff you've done for the course, but in your work in general. And I think I've heard other artists mention before as well, is when it comes to approaching work, even if it's never going to make it into the project, like have that exploration where like whether it is a character or a scene, like fantasize where this person live, like what is their language if it's an alien, setting and that kind of stuff, and then go through that little thought experiment in your head, and then that can give you all these little nuggets of ideas that you never would have had otherwise. But one of the best ways that you explained, or that what you mentioned about your work and how you approach a character design in the course, which I really like it nailed exactly how I see and feel about your work, which I didn't realize that that's what I was thinking until you mentioned it, where you said that, like you don't look at a character. I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm definitely butchering what you said. But in a nutshell, it was a case of like you're more concerned about the personality of the character, like you're more into that side of things, and that shows in the props as well, as opposed to like more of the technical side of things and all the other stuff around it. And then when I look at the rest of your work, like for me, every single piece, even the weapon you did for the hard surface modeling course, like that's technically an inanimate object, but for me that's packed full of personality in terms of the design choices, the color choices, even the stickers you put on it afterwards, and even also the way it operates, because you did that little cool animation thing, which you've also done in the course as well. It's like, for me, that's like sick. Ticks every single box, and it adds that layer to that design that perhaps wouldn't have been there if you never had thought about the personality in the first place.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like that's also where the fun is, like with characters or with props. I mean, I say that with characters, I just pretend to be them. I don't care if they're like man, woman, or whatever. It just, that's why, for example, I don't really like drawing like sexualized characters, because that's not what I am interested in being. So all my characters are kind of like, like badass, because that's probably like some secret fantasy I have of wanting to be some cool person in a movie, So, it's kind of maybe embarrassing, but that's how it feels for me. So, and it's the same with props, like that thing we did with Kirill's class, the folding out weapon you mentioned. I just, in my mind, I'm just only concerned about, I'm just fantasizing in my head about something that would be cool to do and to use. And then what actual shapes you end up using is almost secondary to that. Like that's why we spent so much time in this class in lesson 1 going over the actual idea phase first and talking about all this stuff, like fantasizing about being your character and like using your prop and that kind of stuff, because to me that's what it's all about. Like the you can solve shape wise, you can solve something in 1,000 ways. That's the scary part. Like, so whatever you can do for yourself to, I wouldn't say limit, but to focus in on something, to say, okay, that's who my character is. And then you tie all your shape language and stuff around that feeling or around that personality. It makes it a lot easier for yourself to come up with confident choices,
Yeah, man.
Otherwise, you're just doing some shape design thing, like,
yes.
Yeah.
And so has that always been the case for you, or is that something that you nurtured over time? Like, like what was that situation like for you?
I feel like I probably always did that, but it took a long time before being able to put it into words. Like,
got it.
I feel like even a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, if you guys asked me to do a class, I probably would have said no because I just didn't figure it out yet, But when Mohammed asked me to do the class, I was at that point where I sort of felt that I could finally put stuff into words, and sort of know why I'm doing it. So yeah, I feel like that's something only from the last couple of years that I can. I don't know before that if I, if I um did exactly like that. I think I did, but I just um couldn't properly say it. I couldn't put it into words. Yeah.
Cool.
So
like
yeah.
before we talk a bit more in detail about the course, what I want to ask you is, so you mentioned obviously like with your characters, they're I guess an extension of yourself and like what you imagine yourself to be, or would like to be. And I guess even like one of the cool things, again back to being mentioning personality, is like one of the things that made me smile, but also made me even enjoy or even like approach or wanting to approach a brief in a different way was when you were coming up with the idea for your character, which was the fact that it's, basically inspired by a BTS band member, which I thought was like, again, it's quirky, it's funny. It's on one hand, if you hear someone say that I'm going to do a BTS character, they'll be like, what are you doing? But then at the same time, the way you've done it just shows that is like a perfect way, because it also stands separately from, like, I guess the cliche of a character with a weapon, or like a bionic arm type thing. But then also in what lesson one, which is also one of my favorite lessons, is because you talk in detail about your theory, the choices, and even just the way you showcase how, like, like even the simplifying shapes and all that kind of stuff, like the way you broke it down, for me was like, it was so well done in such an efficient way. I was like, got it straight away. I know exactly what he's talking about, and I know exactly how I can use that on my stuff, which is, that's just golden in terms of like someone studying. But when it comes to characters, because this course obviously is about designing better characters, and you focus an entire, I guess, about 25% of the course is focused on prop design as well. Like, who are iconic characters for you, and which ones have really would you class as ones that are just like tick all the boxes in terms of design, in terms of how, I guess, the prop itself communicates a character and vice versa? I know you do mention you focus on a few cases in the course itself, but I just want to ask you casually, like, what are your favorite examples, or who are your favorite characters?
Oh man. Okay. So the first one that comes up right away is Kaneda from Akira. I just love
Classic.
that movie.
Yeah, man.
I love Kaneda as a character. He's like ballsy, And again, I'm talking about, I just love him because of how he is. I love his jacket too, like how he looks, but he looks cool. But I just like him. He's like the guy who takes action. He's kind of the guy you kind of want to be. He's like a little bit of a bad boy. Of course, his bike is iconic. I mean, I don't think, yeah, I mean, I watch that movie just every now and again. And again, I mean, I love everything from that movie almost. It's, it's a bit confusing sometimes, but even that, I'm like, where else can you get that, And I have the same with something like, I like Solid Snake, or whatever snake, you have 1,000 different snakes, but and I mean, for example, with Kojima games, sometimes I struggle with, how convoluted the plot is and like the cringiness of it sometimes. But then I'm also kind of like, where else can I get that? Like I can't get that amount of cringe and like over the top badassness anywhere else. So that also makes me love it. Like that's why I love, for example, Solid Snake is also like the quiet badass type, and I'm like, oh man, that's so cool. And like he, probably as a kid, I was like, I also want to wear a bandana, even though it would look terrible on me. But those two pop up immediately. What about yours?
The two you've mentioned are definitely up there. Dude, I don't even know, man. I didn't expect to answer this question. I would say, like, I guess growing up, it was similar kind of characters. I mean, like, as a young boy growing up, you tend to want to, you fantasize about, oh, I'd be like that person. I mean, I guess Terminator, but the second one, because I watched them the wrong way around, and I watched them as kids. So, Arnie in the second film, that'd be like, wow, he's a cyborg where he looks human and, he's a badass. But then, looking up, I mean, even Vickers in District 9, like there's all these, obviously I watched them when I was much older, but then as a character, I'm thinking, that guy's almost like a loser to start off with. And then he loses even more for at the end of the film. But then, that journey is like, wow, that's a character that, okay, that's someone that sticks in my brain. And then obviously growing up, you got like, Luke Skywalker, the Red Power Ranger.
I was more of the green. I thought the green was
cool. The green, because he came afterwards. But, I put all my stock in the red one at the beginning and I stuck with him. But then like, there's so many, even RoboCop. I mean, I'm using a lot of like cyborg or people who have actually changed their appearance. So maybe that says a lot about me.
About man.
There's so many. Wow, there's so many. I guess one person you mentioned in your course, I believe you do, is Furiosa, right? I think it's more as a reference in terms of bionic, because of bionic limbs and stuff.
I think so. Yeah, I love Furiosa. Yeah, that's a good one too, man. Yeah,
like that as a character is like up there with like, in terms of just character overall, and even as a female character like with Ripley and all those other kind of characters. It's so
Furiosa is a great one. Yeah, I watch Fury Road like every year or something, and I always love it because it's just like a full 2.5 or 2 hour action scene.
Yeah, man.
But it also has world building, and I want to be Furiosa too. Yeah, she's really awesome.
Yeah, like that film it's one of those where it's easily rewatchable. Like there's some films that are classics, but you're like, I don't mind not watching that for another year or so. But then like definitely Fury Road, and if you're even like Akira as well, it's one of those where it depends on how you want to approach. You can watch it as entertainment, it works. If you want to watch it as like, you want to analyze, the visual side of things, it's got everything you need in there. If you want to analyze it in terms of, like philosophy and psychology, it's got all that kind of stuff in there as well. It's like almost a perfect film in terms of the themes and everything in there. So I guess like films, like in terms of mediums, like what has inspired you the most? Has it been everything? Because you mentioned games, you've mentioned films and TV and stuff. Like, what was that probably your overriding influence throughout your childhood, I guess, and even now?
Yeah, it is. I love it, but I also have this weird thing where, especially the first time I'm playing a game or the first time I'm watching a movie, I refuse to look at it as an artist. Like that's why I can't really go to the movie theaters with concept artist friends, because I don't actually like talking about the art of. I just want the experience.
Yes.
I really just want the vibe, the experience. I don't want to analyze design. So if I really like something, I'll watch it again and like look at it more, as a concept artist. But again, as I mentioned before, I'm a pretty simple person, so I can easily turn off my brain and just watch it and enjoy it. So that for me, that's really what I care about. And then I guess also that comes back in what I enjoy with, designing characters or props or whatever, is that I enjoy sort of the character of it, the personality of it. So that's also what I like about movies. I'm actually not a huge sci-fi fan, even though that's a lot of the work I do. But I, for example, when it comes to games, something like the game Inside. Have you played that? Side scroller.
Is that the one from the people who? Is that the black and white game?
They made Limbo,
of, right? That's it. Yeah, no, I've played Limbo, but I haven't played Inside yet.
Oh man, you have to play it, dude. It's so good.
Man, I mean, it's
one of my favorite games of all time, and like something like that is so inspiring to me. For my work too, and it's not even technically. Well, maybe it is. So I don't know. I don't know what genre you would put it in, but to me, that kind of stuff is more inspiring than anything. Or a movie like Akira. I love all the designs, and I want to learn from that, but it's also just the atmosphere, the way
Yes.
the characters are, the way they behave, the way they stand, that kind of stuff really excites me. So yeah, to answer your question, the inspiration comes a lot from movies and games actually, and shows. Not so much books. I'm not really a
Mm.
reader. I should probably do that more.
Mhm.
I try to read comics, but then I always sort of stop after a while. But
Right.
I kind of enjoy that too, but I wouldn't call that my main influence. I would say mostly it's games and movies. Yeah.
Actually, touching upon inspiration and influence. Obviously, there's multiple ways you can get influenced. Obviously, one is just, I guess, by accident or passively, like you mentioned, you just watch something and then you don't anticipate what you're watching, but then all of a sudden, if it ticks all the boxes or even more boxes you never knew that could be ticked, it just becomes something that's like an obsession, like you mentioned with Akira and a few other things.
Yeah.
But then there's also like deliberate inspiration where you seek it. And then as an arts professional, like, I know you mentioned that obviously in terms of what your themes are for work versus what your favorite things are, like you mentioned with the game inside, versus your subject matter in your work. It's almost like, well, it isn't exactly what you'd think your main source of inspiration is in terms of visuals and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But like, how do you approach a project when it comes to research? And so I guess on one hand, you've got like the things that have really inspired you, the stuff that's got you to this point already, which are your overall influences. But then how do you supplement that with references and research? So let's say you got like a brief and you got to do this, that, and the other. How do you approach research?
So when I get an assignment coming in, right, and have to design some sort of character, the first thing before the research even, I need to decide who that character is myself. Sometimes you get a pretty clear brief, so I get a feeling of who it is. I need to be able to fantasize about being them. So I and if they don't give me enough information, then I decide. Then I pick something. And then that helps me when I go for reference. I don't go for reference right away, and I'm a little bit picky about when I do my reference searches because it just influences you so much. So and then once I get the idea down that I think is interesting, then I'll look for reference. But in terms of reference, I also sort of like to eliminate certain things for myself. So if I let's say soldier or whatever, and then there's soldier with general armor plates, then maybe I eliminate looking for soldiers, because that will give me like a standard result. So I'll try to find some other angle. Like we do with the class, I was really into BTS, the K-pop band. So I actually was really into one song, like Boy with Love, but I was at the time I started the class, I was obsessed with that song. So and then I think, that's actually a funny, to me, it's personal to me. It's like a funny thing to start off from. Like, then I look at K-pop bands, and what do they wear? And I don't even think that shows through that much in the end result, but it's fun to start off from something like that. So, so as far as reference and research, I try to find an angle that excites me and that interests me, and then go from there. And something that I think, maybe it is very standard, but in my mind, at least, it's something different, or it's something that excites me and doesn't bore me. Because it just, if I have to do some standard soldier design, for example, I have to find something for myself that makes it fun. Coming back to having fun with it, there needs to be something that makes it exciting for me. So I just go a little bit off, try to go off the regular path, I guess.
And with the course itself,
Yeah.
is like, again, I mentioned this earlier, in terms of on a technical level, there's so much in this which is easily usable at any level, in terms of like if you're just trying to figure your own workflow out, if you already have a workflow, but you want to supplement it further, or if you are getting the course because you just want to be a better professional. Again, the stuff you can transplant, like, I mean, like, let's break it down. You got effectively, although you focus on one main character, I believe there's, I guess, two characters, but then you've got that awesome character creator you've got, which you can like that's one of the most efficient and coolest things that I've seen in a long time. So I love that
Good.
element of it.
Yeah.
We've got 3 props. And then there's like also your approach to those, which is not just in one way. There's, the 2D side, the 3D side, then a combination of both and how to use them all. And like you mentioned before, when it comes to briefs and clients, I guess maybe this isn't for everybody because some people just have a rigid way they want to work, and that's great. It works for them. But then, it also gives you scope to approach a problem with any tool and it still be enough. And you don't have to focus on like, okay, I'm not good at 3D, so I'm going to be limiting myself to 2D. Whereas for me, with, like an outsider looking at the course in terms of not having used your workflow before, this looks to me like, okay, now whilst working on these elements or understanding these things you've taught, now I can just do this because that looks like it's the best way to get to the end goal, as opposed to not doing it because I'm not efficient at it. So like with that workflow that you've got, how long did it take for you to get there? Because one of the cool moments you mentioned in the course, and one of the cool, like, I guess, quotable things you mentioned in the course is, although you can pick up the techniques pretty quickly because you explain it really well and you can start practicing then almost immediately, you do make a point to say that nurture this for years, not months or weeks.
Yeah.
So how long did it take for you to nurture that workflow yourself?
Oh man. Again, like I said, I only feel in the last couple of years feel comfortable to even give a class like this. And I started CDA in 2011. So that's 10 years ago. When I started at CDA, I remember telling my teacher, I was like, I'm never going to do 3D. I hate this shit. I'm never going to do 3D. And he was like, okay, cool, bro. Like, just wait, we'll see. And then now I love it. So I feel like it's stages, like at first, I said, I'm just going to be a 2D artist. I'm just going to do drawing. And then you do that for a while. And then you see other people, doing stuff in 3D. And you're like, oh man, that's actually pretty cool, And then you realize later on that being a designer is not about, am I a 2D guy or 3D guy? It's about using what works best. And yeah, that's why I make it a big point in the class that this whole thing takes years, even though, students might be interested in like, how can I be, up there right now? And maybe they will be, I don't know. But for me, it took years to get where I am now, and like learning little bit, sort of, I'm not saying mastering, but sort of being more comfortable at 2D and then deciding, okay, I'm going to give 3D a shot, and seeing how that can help me out. And then slowly, bit by bit, you learn also with client work, like, oh, for this job, I really need to go 2D, or just this job, I really need to go 3D. And that, in my opinion, that only comes with experience, to be able to see what a project needs. But in very simple terms, for example, let's say I have to do some intricate temple design with all these pillars, there's no way in hell I'm going to do that in 2D, Are you kidding me? Like, all those pillars, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
In 3D, I just can do one pillar and copy it around and then draw over it or render it out or whatever. So that's kind of how I decide. If something has to be very organic, I think, maybe it's easier to draw this one. And of course, with professional work, it's a talk you have with your client, what you can do. If you have a chill client, they don't care. But yeah, so I feel like that workflow comes bit by bit, and I hope that students who take this class will see that as options, and then disregard what they don't like, and maybe take what they do like, and slowly taking all the classes and doing their research, build up a workflow that works for them. But it just takes a while before I'm sure it's the same for you, where like, okay, I know what this requires, so I'm going to use this for that. It's just nice to have that toolbox, I'm not sure. Yeah.
That's all right. You carry on. Yeah.
I'm not sure, for example, with your the September spaceships, did you use like a 3D base for that, or did you just do drawing?
Mixture. It was a mixture. It was a case, like, again, exactly what you just said. It was a case of, what am I going to do today? and how do I
Mhm.
feel? And sometimes it was a case of at points I wasn't even by my PC anyway, so I had to do it on my tablet. So obviously
Yeah.
that already decided how I was going to approach it. Um, I say about 80% of it was 3D, just because it's so much quicker. Like you said, I can
Yeah.
just get some renders out. I do a lot of line renders, like you do yourself as well, which helps with certain elements as well, and it's just a great time saver. But yeah, it was a mixture. And again, that's what I like about the course, is because it just nurtures those skill sets, and it makes it much easier to decide which one is going to work best.
Mhm.
And also, it's like, I guess it is like tools, right? And the same way when you're younger, you just decide, okay, I'm going to use blue for the sky and green for the grass, not the other way around, unless you're doing, that's how you
Yeah.
want to do it.
Yeah.
That's how tools have become. And like 10 years ago when you were learning, and you mentioned that, but I guess you didn't want to do 3D. It was much
Mm.
more of a steeper learning curve to use
Yeah.
3D versus how it is now. So tools have progressed crazily in the last like decade or so.
Yeah.
But then the key thing you mentioned as well is that when it comes to designing, like the tool is almost like an afterthought when the design is concerned. And
Mhm.
one of the it's mainly the first lesson, right, where you go into your theory of like how you design. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Actually, yeah, that's personally my favorite chapter of the whole class, the proportions, shapes, and details. And I guess we're going over color and lighting too, like those 5 or 6. Um,
and
Personally,
like,
that's my favorite part. I like that.
and like one of the key things that jump out to me versus how I work is because I'm very scattergun in terms of like how I tackle a project.
Hmm.
Whereas in terms of using tools, and I just sit and throw things at something, and then I just like chip away at it afterwards.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whereas what I like about your approach is it's considered, and your choices are determined by that overriding theme of like, is this going to benefit the design, and does it communicate the design well? And like what does design mean for you? I know that's a big one, and that's something that's always going to be debated. But what
Mhm.
does design mean for you?
I don't know, man. That's a tricky question. Can
Mm.
you answer it?
Um, I guess it changes. Before, when I was younger, design was something that I associated with stuff that was just cool. Like when I saw something like, whether it be in a supercar or, like when I first saw the PlayStation for the first time, I thought, wow, that's what design is.
Hmm.
But then now I associate it with more function. Like, does it meet the function of what it's intended to? Therefore, it's a great
Yeah.
design. And then that thing I originally thought was design was more aesthetics. But then
Hmm.
sometimes, it merges over. But I guess as a professional, as someone, trying to become more of a professional and establish a
Hmm.
career, for me, design is more like, or being a designer is more someone who's able to make a correct choice for the problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and I think in the course as well is like there's a lot of problem solving going on, especially with the way you simplify the shapes.
Yeah.
That is lesson one, right, where you break down what is it? Is it I think like a canister with screws in it, and you talk about obviously how big the screws are, and
Yeah.
making sense and all that kind of stuff. And I've made that
Yeah.
mistake so many times in the past where like I've put things in details that make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. That's that was actually so okay. So in the class, I have a chapter called design, which is way too broad, but I didn't know what
Mm.
else to name it. But we literally go over just technically or like um, very concrete things to think about when you're designing, right?
Mm.
So we go over proportions. There's a big video about proportions. We go over shapes. We go over details. Those are the main 3 things I always think about when drawing. And I have very specific ways of thinking about it. Like, what is my proportion distribution? About shapes, I have a very clear way of thinking. And with details too, I have like check boxes that I like to tick off. And I keep thinking about them when I'm drawing. So,
Mm.
for example, with details, it's like, are the details describing the scale of my object? Are they showing the form of the object? Are they showing form themselves? I don't want them to just be stickers that's pasted onto something. So
Mm.
that's kind of the thing that I hope the students will really look at that video and take into the rest of the course, because that's kind of what I always think about when drawing. Um, so in that sense, the design part is very concrete. Like
Mm.
it's in the sense of the class, in sense of that chapter, it's literally going over those things and then
Mhm.
going how I approach and really think about why using color in a certain way. In terms of the work, yeah, it's like the problem solving, I guess. It's
Mm.
just, I don't know, man. The word design is so broad. Like
Yes,
I don't.
yes. I guess it's
It's
another label, right? Like, I mean, one thing, not just
yeah,
humans in general, but artists, we like giving labels to things. It has a benefit because it helps you, I guess, compartmentalize certain things. But then at the same time, it is such like there's so many crossovers with certain topics. You kind of like you get it in terms of in your brain, but then it's hard to, I guess, really explain in I mean, at least in words. But
it
then
is
obviously visually
art.
you can quickly explain it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Like the word art. What the hell does that even mean? I, I
Yeah.
don't. I don't. I don't really know. But but being creative or I don't. I don't know, man. I'm not, but yeah, that's why I usually call myself a concept designer, I guess, because
Hmm.
I feel art is more. But again, I don't really know what all of it means anyway.
Yeah.
But I feel art seems more like up in the air. Like designer seems a bit more concrete. Like I'm
Right.
solving a problem visually to
Strategic and all that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
like it feels a bit more concrete. But yeah, I'm probably not the best guy to answer that. As you see by my fuzzy answer.
No, but nevertheless, it's still like I like it because it's your perspective, right? Like
Yeah.
it just highlights that it's something that is, I guess, can just be consigned to being a label. And the main thing is what you're creating, does it
Mhm.
solve that particular problem? Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
lesson 2 is where we go over the actual character itself, right?
Yeah.
Like
So in lesson two, sorry, go ahead.
no, so yeah, that workflow is like super legit. That's how I can describe it. It's just I was like, okay, cool. Because for me personally, someone who doesn't do characters, um, mainly because it's like yourself, and originally like, I found it difficult, and it's like, oh, there's
Yeah.
so many things to get right. Like I need to work on my anatomy, and that takes time. And I'll just do some spaceship with wings instead. But then with this chapter itself, or even the whole course itself, it's like, okay, I'm definitely going to tackle some soon because this has
Good to
made
hear.
it super accessible for me to even want to do that. I mean, like I do a lot of spaceships. They're all got to be flown by someone, right? So
Yeah.
this is going to be my excuse to give these vehicles some pilots. So
Yeah.
what was
See
your
that.
process behind like the character side of things in terms of explaining that in terms of
Yeah.
like for students?
So uh, in the course, we'll just be in lesson two, like you said, we're doing the characters, and we're actually doing two. So one is like my BTS character, I'll call
Mm-hmm.
him, the main character, and we'll do like a start to finish workflow, and then we do the character creator, where in Photoshop with layer comps and layering, we can sort of mix and match different characters, but it all has like a strong 3D base. Like I'd use
Mm-hmm.
Dust 3D. You can use Poser, or like there's another one called Character Creator or something, just because it helps out a lot. It's just, I guess, tricks, man. Like just to bypass that stupid anatomy stage. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it works. I love working that way because it, like, design wise, I just want to dress up a character. And
Mm-hmm.
before I started using 3D, like 90% of it was figuring out if my stupid anatomy was correct, like if that eye has to be a little bit higher or lower. Now I don't have to think about that anymore. So that's why, yeah, in my workflow, we use a lot of 3D. We do some sketches just 2D before that, but I love using 3D to use as sort of a base to draw on top of.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the clothing and items and all of that stuff, just draw with 2D. I mean, you can go as all out as you want in 3D, but that's the way I prefer to do things. For me, that's the quickest. I can
Mm-hmm.
just set up a character real quick. I also, what I love with 3D is that I can sort of feel out the pose
Mm.
better. I can like change the finger position just a tiny little bit, and it's just turning knobs. It's just like
Hmm.
manipulating it, which I love. So you can really look at it from all angles and feel it out. I just love it. I think it's a nice way of working. I mean, I'm sure there's people who say that will be cheating, but who cares?
I mean,
That's not
like,
interesting.
I guess if it was a case of doing it as a purist point of view, maybe you can do it, like 2D and everything. And there is satisfaction in figuring something out, like, like in 2D or doing everything from scratch, 100%.
Mm.
Because even like going full circle, let's say you want to go down that path, bringing it back and using 3D afterwards, you can take all that information on board. However,
Yeah.
if this is something you want to do as a career, this is saving you that time, saving you that pain of going through that, and giving
Yeah.
you something usable that you can get paid from.
Yeah.
And then, about your clients, because as you're aware, clients don't care how long it takes you. Well, they do, obviously, that's how long that, in terms of invoicing. But at the same
Yeah.
time, they want it done quicker and they want it done yesterday. So
They don't
why
care what
not?
you use.
Sorry. Yeah.
They don't care if you use 3D under your character. They,
Yeah.
they
100,
couldn't care.
100%. And
Yeah.
they just want the job done. And, this is great because it gives you that. It gives you a solid workflow to actually meet that demand, I feel.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned, because you mentioned about speed and efficiency. And
Mhm.
like, speed is a dangerous one because you don't want to, especially if you're learning, you don't want to just focus being purely about speed. That's more, I guess, like on the professional side of things. However, one of the things that I've noticed you do a couple of times in the course, which I think is really, really cool, is that towards even the end, or when you have gotten to a stage where it seems like it's quite far in terms of you started going over the line drawings and everything, you decide that I don't like the look of this, I'm changing it. Now,
Mhm.
if your workflow wasn't that flexible, and I believe you mentioned, especially with the character creator, like you mentioned, it's like a non-destructive workflow,
Mhm.
is that you can easily do those changes because of the way you approach your work. Whereas if it was in a different way, where it wasn't like that, maybe a bit more convoluted, then making those changes would be more expensive, more painful, and might even put you off, which means that
Mhm.
your design won't be successful. So that's one of the key things I took away from that as well. Is that
Oh,
one of the reasons why this workflow is one that you've gravitated towards, would you say?
yeah, and it's also so when we do our character, the BTS character, I like to split everything up. So we have the 3D underlayer, then we're gonna do a line drawing, then we do flat colors without any lighting, and I treat the lighting completely separate. So we're doing the lighting on top as a final, and that
Mm,
basically stems from me just being too overwhelmed with all this different stuff
mm,
you have to think about, because you have to think about your design, and then you have to think about how the light hits it, and you have to think about the local colors of your. It just, at least when I was learning, it was just too much. So I just
mm,
decided to split it out into things I can tackle on their own. So when we're doing the character, it's you can literally focus it on one thing at a time. You can focus on your lines first, getting a nice, actual design. Then we can focus on our flat color. So what is the actual color of the t-shirt they're wearing or whatever? And then finally, we worry about how we're actually going to lit the character. And then because we have all those things separate, we can easily change the color later on. We can change the lighting super easily because it's just on different layers. So
mm.
that stems from me from just not being able to tackle it all at once like a
Mm.
painter could. So um,
Nice.
yeah,
I like it.
that's
I expected it to be, the answer more to be like on the opposite side, like more like, because it was um again more like efficient, and just like that's the workflow that you came upon because it's
yeah.
just the best way. But again, back to what you mentioned about being honest about your your own abilities and on workflows, and even like things that frustrate you. That was, I guess, like more a response to that, right? Like, okay, these things take time and they're kind of annoying me. This workflow is a great response to that. And
Yeah, and
please
I
go ahead.
think I think it is, for me it is efficient. Like I hope that students who take this class see the workflow and then maybe think, that doesn't work for me. So I'm going to combine flat color and lighting into one. Like
Mm,
I hope they make those decisions for themselves. Like this
mm,
is what works for me. I think what's most interesting from my end is to be able to show the full spectrum, and how this works for me. Because I do think it's efficient. For me, it's very efficient because, for example, treating the flat colors as a separate sort of layer stack.
mhm,
I always send my clients different color versions because it's just literally as simple as changing the hue
mm.
saturation slider of the different items. So I can do a lot of different things with values and colors that way. But um, yeah,
And
so it is ambitious, but it came from not being able to handle it all at
mm.
once.
And regarding clients, because you mentioned that in the course as well, which for me when I heard that I was like, that's just like such a no brainer. It's like, why haven't I been doing that? Like how do clients respond to that? Like, have you seen them um make like yeah how do they respond to being having those options that you provided?
Yeah, so in the class I mentioned it. I'm actually I'm very picky with what I show my clients, and
Yeah.
that sounds a little bit bad maybe, but okay, client is king, right? So in the end, you have to give them what they pay for. But I really honestly believe that as a concept designer, I have to contribute ideas and I have to make strong decisions about what
Mm,
something is. I feel like that's my responsibility. So I usually like to decide certain things and then present it to them. I don't give them too many options because they will. I feel like that's almost like insulting because some
mm,
clients might want that, right? They just want to see a lot of stuff, but in a lot of cases they hire me to solve a problem for them, and I feel like I owe it to them to tell them what I think is the right answer.
mm,
So in terms of variation, I the variation I give them comes more from little things like for example the character creator, like a different shirt
mm,
or different colors of the shirt, but the character underneath, with the character creator, the woman underneath, I've decided who she is, how she feels, and then we can talk about that. The client, we can go back and forth.
mm,
And of course, I communicate this with them beforehand how I like to present it, but that's kind of what I like to do. So I like to decide who that character is in that case. Like the woman of the character creator, like to me, the way she stands and looks feels a certain way, and then the clothing that comes on top of it is a different matter. Like that's the part where we can talk about.
mm,
So I'm a bit, and I talk about that in the class too. I'm a bit picky about what I show to clients. Like I don't like this thing where people say, you send them 9 ideas and they always pick the worst one. I'm like, yeah, then why do you send over your worst one?
mm.
I rather send 2 ideas that I both like and have them pick something that I don't even like. So, and again, you know, I'm just a opinionated person. So, so feel free to disagree with me, but
Well,
that's how I approach it.
even if someone does, with the way you've set it up, they can easily do, those 9 ideas or even 20, because that
True.
workflow is solid, man, legit.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. You can do a lot with it. And for this course, the character designer, I think I made like nine versions of her with all different clothing
Yeah.
items or different setups and colors. And you could go endless with it. You can keep going or drawing on top, which makes it so fun.
Mhm.
But what I send to clients, I try to not go overboard. But yeah, in terms of the workflow, you can go crazy with it. That's the fun part about it, I think.
And just a quick one on that, like regarding what you send over to clients. What is
Mhm.
your mental process in terms of what you send? Like, how do you determine, or what's your, I guess, mental checklist of like, I'm going to send this, and what threshold does those ideas have to pass before they are considered
Um,
ones they're happy to send over?
that is very specific with per client. Like
Right.
one guy I'm working with literally just wants to see the most loose sketches I have,
Mm.
which is kind of scary at first. It's sometimes I literally send over stickman drawings, man. Like it's just what works. And then
Yes.
other people, you realize right away or through the course of working, it also comes a little bit with experience that they need to see something more finished and able in
Mm.
order to be able to read it. So that's kind of depending client by client, and that's something, at least in my case, you just kind of figure out with experience. But mentally, most important part for me is that when I send over the work, I'm confident that that's the work it should be. So I'm not the kind of person who sends over stuff and then I'm like, oh man, I hope they like it. I mean, of course you are like that. We all are, because we're all
Mm,
insecure artists. But it's tough to explain. But what I mean is that by the time I send something over, I'm confident that I tell them this is what I think the solution to your problem
mm,
should be. Like this is what I think the answer is, and then we can discuss it. But I feel like I owe it to the client to at that point be confident about my choices and my decisions, even though the point up to that was just, filled with frustration and
mm,
insecurity. But by the time I send something over, I can usually say, hey, this is what I think the thing should be. And then even discuss it. If they say, oh, I don't think so, then depending on the client, you can even talk about it, like in a professional, nice way.
mm,
But I sometimes really try to convince my client of I think this is the right way to go.
mm,
And I don't mean that as like a sort of disrespect to the client, but they usually, so far, they all appreciate that. I feel
mm,
like that's something I feel like that's my responsibility to enter my voice into the whole thing and not just be their hand.
mm. That's a great insight. Thanks for that. Um, Lesson 3, which is my
Yeah,
favorite one, which is props, and that's more
yeah,
because it's linked more to my interests. But nevertheless, yeah, man, if you want to give us a good lowdown on lesson 3 because it's sick.
yeah. So in lesson 3, we're doing all props. It's a full lesson dedicated to the props for our character, for our BTS character in this case. And so I didn't want to just do one prop and then have that be it, because that's not how I work. I sometimes do stuff only 2D, sometimes do it only 3D, sometimes do a mix of both. So I thought I need to be able to show the full range of how I work so that students can pick and choose whatever they like. So we're doing 3 props in this lesson. One is fully done in 2D, so no 3D or anything, just in Photoshop, pure drawing. And then another prop is done almost fully in 3D, in this case, Fusion 360. But, it's not a Fusion 360 class. It's more about the techniques and why I use something like that. And then the students can use Fusion or they can use Blender. That is not the important part. And then we do another prop, the sort of giant gun kind of thing, and we set that up more as a 3D/2D workflow. So whereas the second prop, the sort of robotic arm, is all 3D, so all the details are 3D as well. In the last prop, we basically do a block-in model of the weapon in Blender, and then we draw on top of that. So it's kind of I use that the most, where I just
Mm.
set up a block model in Blender and then draw all the details and stuff on top of that. So I would say, you think I got that right? I would say that's the main.
Yeah, no, for
Yeah.
sure. Because I guess the key element is not only because obviously in the first lesson and even in the second one, because obviously how you design the character, you're figuring out where the props are going to be and which ones are going to be the ones that are chosen to take forward, which obviously help communicate the character. But then what I really love about it is not only the fact that the different ways you approach it. It's like a recipe, right? Like you've shown how to cook this particular meal in like 3 different ways, but each one tastes amazing. So it's like you decide which one works best for you. And again, like and you've taken obviously courses in the past as well. Is
Mhm.
like how often have you just followed true to that particular lesson as opposed to adapting it and then assimilating it into your own way?
Yeah.
Like I guess it
Yeah.
happens more often than not, right? Like you just like you tend to just change it in a way where I guess whether it's down to just habits and preference and all that kind of stuff, and maybe you just find a different solution to what was
Yeah.
originally taught. And what I love about
Yeah.
this is it's like that, but on steroids, because you can easily take that and then even fuse some of them, which you show because you use 2D and 3D.
Mhm.
But then even like add it to other things also. But even like just the way you have approached the props is the thought put into it, the fact that when you look at it, everything makes sense just visually. Like, okay, that does that and this does that. And you explained that again in the first lesson, with the research and how you approach like functionality and why things should be in a certain place. And then like, but with props though, because obviously it's for the character,
Mhm.
and some of the iconic characters we've mentioned in the past, it's like like would Canada's bike look as cool if it was a four-wheeler or even like, like six wheels? Like, like there's certain decisions that make sense for that particular character.
Yeah.
How did you, and it's mentioned before, like when you go from 2D or concept to 3D, sometimes things can get lost because of the nature of 3D, especially with Fusion, because although I love Fusion 2, I use that a lot. It's still, it's CAD based, so it's very clinical, right? Like, is there ever a challenge for you to make sure that you still want to make sure those props relate to that character? And if it doesn't, how do you resolve that?
Well, a lot of that comes from before I even start. So, for example, with the robotic arm we're doing, the whole feeling I had of it was it is kind of clinical, it's this robotic arm this character had. I decided that he doesn't like having a robotic arm. It's not going to be some fancy thing. It's something that's going to be something that he'll probably hide most of the time. That was my thinking, whereas normally when I draw a character, I like to like put stickers on everything. And I was like, that's not who this guy is. He wouldn't do that. So that basically that thought process in my mind made me think, you know what? I think Fusion 360 is good for this because exactly what you said, it gives that sort of clinical look, but then for that battery pack, that's not what I wanted at all. Like I wanted a little bit more flowing, or it's also still pretty rigid, but it's a bit more loose in my mind, the way the way it feels. So that's where I thought, you know what, that's a good one to do just in 2D because drawing allows me to be looser. So, for some people hearing this, that might be a little bit vague, but that's sort of the thing that comes with trying a lot of things and sort of trying to feel out what works for me, what sticks, So, and that's the same with the gun at the end with the blender blocking. I realized, if I'm going to do this all in Fusion, it's going to be too rigid for me and I'm not going to be loose enough to have fun with the detail placement of a thing as big as this. So I thought for this one, it's more important how it opens up. It's more important how certain things move. So that's why I thought I'll just set that up in Blender. We actually do, it's totally optional, but we actually do a little bit of rigging in that lesson because I love, that's what I love doing now, like doing little animations. I've actually been doing that for clients. Like I've been doing like little animations of how gun work, just a blocking model, and they really like it because I can show them that it will actually sort of work. And it's another tool I can use to try to convince them of why they should pick my idea, yeah, I feel like that's usually how those decisions come to be, like the arm felt clinical. So that's why Fusion 360 felt like the right choice, but between those three, those are the three workflows I switch back and forth,
And this is an impossible question to answer. But like between the two, prop or the character itself, and more like I guess like the overall physical form, which one do you favor the most, or which one's more important?
I think the character is more important to me because that is the person or thing that shows the personality, and that everything exudes from. Like if I draw a weapon, I kind of want to always know who is it attached to. If I don't know that, then it can be anything. But if it's attached to some brute, like gigantic muscular guy, then in my mind, I'm already thinking, maybe I'll give him like a super tiny gun, because that's kind of weird. And like, because in my mind, I go straight away to giving that person like a huge weapon. But then I'm like, I've seen that. So maybe what if he has like something very, like kind of like a weird tiny thing or something. I don't know. Like that's usually my thought process. So in that sense, I think for me, the character is more important. Even if I don't end up drawing the character, I like to think about that even when doing a vehicle or prop or something like that. Kind of think about who's using it,
And what's the most iconic prop for you ever?
Man, also you're gonna have to answer this one too, man. So we'll both do our best. That's a tricky question, man. Okay. Well, I love Canada's bike. To come back to it, that's one thing. I love actually also the sort of laser gun in Akira they use at the very end.
So sick.
Oh man, that thing is so good.
Even the sound of
Um,
it, how it functions, all of it. That's so sick.
yeah, exactly. That's so cool. Yeah, like the laser just shoots through everything. It's awesome. You know what? I probably when we get off the podcast, I'm like, oh man, that's my favorite prop, but I can't think
There's
about it
so
now.
many, right?
Yeah, yeah. So what about you?
I think I have to go over it with the obvious one. It's probably going to be the lightsaber.
Ah,
And
yeah.
I don't know which lightsaber because although some have maybe more prestige, Darth Maul's, when you first ever saw that, was like
Oh man.
super badass.
Yeah, when they start the fight and that second laser comes out, and you're like,
That the timing on that moment is so good.
it is, man. I mean, I don't know. How old are you?
34.
Okay, so we were both pretty young when that movie came out, right?
Yes, yes,
You,
yes. That's
I
my
mean,
defense for liking those films because I was quite young when that came out.
I know I piss people. I mean, I hope I don't offend you, but I'm not a huge Star Wars guy.
That's okay.
But I think you are. You know, I heard. You know, you mentioned that I think before. But I mean, I like the property, but it's not. But I love Episode One. I know that's people say that's the worst one, but
Yeah.
I was just nostalgic. So I was a little kid when I saw it. It made a huge impact on me. I wanted to be Qui-Gon Jinn. I thought he was like the most badass. That's his name.
He was sick.
That was like my he was like my hero. And then, like you mentioned, with Darth Maul, when that extra laser came out, I was just blown away. So for me, I can't look at that movie objectively. It just has too
Yeah.
much nostalgia. The same with the movie Hook. I love Hook by
Hooks.
Spielberg.
Same here. I love it.
Yeah. And Spielberg himself said it's his worst movie.
Yeah.
I just love it. I can't look at that movie objectively. You know, it's too much rooted in nostalgia for me. So,
How old
but
were
that's a
you
good.
when that came out? When you first watched it, sorry.
Oh man, I think Hook came out in '91 or something like that. So
Mm.
I was 2 when it came out. So I don't know when I watched it.
But you're quite young, I guess. It wasn't like
I was
last week or
very
something, no?
I probably could just speak a little bit of English,
Right,
like
right, right.
so 9 or 10. I don't know when
Yeah,
I learned English.
I think that's the best way to explain it is like you can't look at those films objectively because again, like the nostalgia element, I guess the timing when you looked at it, like for me, with the exception of the latest trilogy, like all the Star Wars were when I was young. So like, you know,
Yeah.
like for me, they've always been films targeted at kids anyway. They're made for kids. So that's why
Mhm.
all those things are like, wow, so cool and shiny and all that kind of stuff. Yes, I'm a Star Wars fan. Like it's probably shaped a lot of why, looking back at it, like doing my own self-therapy, it's probably shaped a lot of why I'm probably in the entertainment industry.
Mm,
But yeah, man, like with episode one, like when I look back at it now and all the, if I were to watch it, yes, certain things when you look at it, I get why it's so derided in terms of like with that whole trilogy. But for me, when I watched them, like I didn't care about all that kind of stuff. I wanted to see cool ships, big tick on that.
Yeah.
Cool weapons, big tick on that. Badass fight
Yeah.
scenes, big tick on that. Like I didn't realize the first trilogy's lightsaber fights were so rigid because I always
Yeah.
thought in my head like they were all like episode one and beyond. And like back to Darth Maul as a character. First of all, like as a baddie, that has got to be one of movies' greatest baddies of all time. Visually,
I know, right?
in terms of
Yeah.
weapons, in terms of the moves, even that little motorbike he drives off in at the beginning, which drops off the cliff and just carries on driving. When he
Mhm.
first makes an appearance, like so sick. And then
Yeah, man.
with
He was,
episode, sorry, go ahead.
he was mysterious too, Darth Maul.
Exactly, and then he gets killed, and even more mysterious. You know,
Gets or something like that.
it's like I've always been one of those when it comes to films. I always wanted to know like everything and anything about a particular film's or a story's universe and backstory, like Middle Earth, for example. You know, like Star Wars. There's so much lore, you just feed on it. But then I've also gone on to realize that the ones that I really appreciate the most is where sometimes it's super vague and maybe it's the best thing not to know. That's why it makes it super awesome.
Yeah, totally. That was my problem with Darth Vader, and I know I'm going to offend a lot of people, but I think in one of episode 4 or something, I forgot, like at the opening scene, there's like Vader and he steps over a soldier, and it looked so dumb. I just didn't respect it. And like one scene he falls off some stairs or something. He's like, ugh, and I was like, I don't know. I was like, that guy doesn't scare me. And also, I never wanted to be Luke because I thought he was whiny. So it
Yes.
just didn't stick with me in that point. In that sense, I mean, I thought the guy who played Anakin in episode 2, that was the first time I realized I was also still very young, but I
Mhm.
realized at that point for the first time, like I don't think this is good acting. Like I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
for the first time in my life, I just didn't bought it, even though
Yeah.
that character I thought was cool because he was like sort of emo, and they killed his mom, so he had revenge on everyone. I was like, whoa, that's cool. And like, I was like super in love with Natalie Portman, probably at the time, like a huge crush. I was like, wow. And he's like also dating her. But then I don't know. Yeah. In those old movies, the, I, I don't know. It's just, it's something I never fully connected with, but
Mm,
I do agree with what you say, like the fullness, the richness of the world. I love that about it. Like, I
mm.
think that's with Lord of the Rings too. I mean,
That's
I love
near
that kind of
perfect.
stuff. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But
Sure.
that's obviously because the guy, while talking, took like, a quarter of his life trying to flesh it out, which says a lot
Yeah,
about how much it takes to really make something
yeah,
great, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Um, I think Ben Morrow put a post on a few years back about how long certain projects took to make, and I think Akira was like near that, about 14 years or something.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So it's like,
Yeah,
to put in perspective in terms of like, you know, um, for anybody out there, even just as a reminder for anybody who is aware, like to make great things, although they're consumed almost in an instant, and you think, wow, that was amazing, that was great. Like, for example, that lightsaber fight in episode 1. I mean, it probably, if you put the edit together, it probably lasts about a minute, maybe a bit more. But you can
yeah,
imagine how long it took to choreograph and design and create. But then
yeah,
like
exactly.
look at Lord of the Rings, Akira, and all these other amazing IPs, and like some of
Hmm.
these things took absolute decades. I mean, even Star Wars, that's taken one man, he's almost an entire life in his entire career just to even flesh out. Um,
Yeah,
Whether it's by choice or not, obviously that only George can answer that. But it's like, take note of the fact that sometimes things need or require a lot of time to really make
yeah.
great.
That's a good point, man. I totally agree with you. That
Back to
stuff takes years.
sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that's I just said I agree with you. That
Ah,
stuff takes years. It just takes a long time to create anything.
and like even touching upon that, does that demotivate you at all with that realization, or does that motivate you knowing that you have got
No,
time to make things?
no. What the biggest thing that I learned in my career so far, and it might change, but the biggest thing that I came to realize is that for me, it's all about the process. It's not about the end result. So the
Mm,
the process has to be fun. That's also what I'm. You know, in the beginning of my career, I took jobs that looked prestigious because of the name,
mm,
but then the job itself sucked. And I
mm.
realized this isn't it. Like I much rather work with people who are fun to work with and where the process is fun. And then you work as hard as you can and you hope that the result is good. And it
Yes.
probably will be better because you had a good time making it. But right now if the process isn't fun, I just can't do it. Something has to change. So for me, I don't get worried about that because I just make sure or try my best to make the actual doing the thing fun.
Mhm.
And then what comes out of it, a lot of that you can't even control. So
Mm,
I would say to students, especially like, you know, there, and everyone has to go through it through their own way, right? You
mhm,
have to learn it yourself. You probably have to take up some jobs that suck to realize that for yourself. But
mm.
for, for me, all I can say is that, yeah, it's really about the process and there's no, at least for me, there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You
Mm.
have to sort of, yeah, you have to have a good time while doing it. That's the way to go, I think.
And touching upon process, obviously the first 3 lessons
Yeah.
are mainly about process and how to realize that process into something tangible, obviously in terms of a finished design or a prop. Fourth lesson
Hmm.
is about bringing it all together with the
Yeah.
illustration. How do you
Yeah.
feel about that part of the process anyway? Because it brings it all together. Like, what are your emotions when you come to finish a piece off, and in particular, obviously with the course? And what can students expect from this lesson?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're good at this, man. This podcast. That's a nice way of bringing it together again. Nice. Very good.
Thanks.
So yeah, I enjoy that a lot because for me, I mean, the hardest when we get into lesson 4, doing like a cool illustration of our character together with our props, the hard work, in my opinion, is done. We did all the designing already. Now it's just putting them all together in what we already were thinking about, like, because the whole point is we want to feel out our character. Who is he or she or, whatever. And we want to feel out our props. Like, what does it do? Like, how you handle it. It's all that sort of thing we were working for in lesson 2 and 3 and really figuring out the design. So then in lesson 4 is the part that I really like to do because then we can actually get to show that off. So we can show how our character behaves, instead of just a standard standing pose to show off the design. We can show the prop in action, to show how it's being used. Like, to me, that's super fun. And it's also fun because the design is already there. We just have to draw it in another pose. And, and we the way we set it up with 3D and like, and things like that, especially the 3D, that can already help us a great way into setting up an illustration like this. So to me, lesson 4 is I hope students will find the same, but it's just really fun because, we can really focus on expressing ourselves through what we created instead of focusing on the design part.
Cool. And I know you mentioned this with each stage. We've also mentioned it multiple times throughout the podcast, but just to summarize, like, what would you like for students to take away the most from this course?
I mean, I really hope that students will see this. What I find important is to show throughout the course that I sort of mess up and then fix my mistakes, and that I talk about that. Like, it's really important for me to convey that it's okay to mess up, like that's just something that's part of the job. And that even when you're a working professional or whatever you want to call it, that's still part of it. So that's something to just show students. I think that was an important part for me to show, like, that side of it. But then in terms of learning, I hope they can, I really hope they can pick up what they want and need from the different workflows and how to approach a character, not just in terms of how you're actually going to do the drawing, but how are you going to treat it in terms of who do you want your character to be? How do you want your prop to feel like? Like, how heavy is it? Like, how can I actually use it? Like, those are the kind of things that I think we go over that are really important. And then workflow wise, I hope they can pick and choose what they like, because we go over a lot of different workflows. So I hope they can just see, like, oh, this little part fits right into what I'm doing. This little part I'm going to discard. This little part I might tweak and modify, and sort of help towards building their own complete set of tools to use.
Should students prep for anything before taking this course, or is it more a case of like more of like having a mindset before they take the course, or is it a case of whoever wants it can just go in headfirst?
Well, I think it's not a complete beginner's class in the sense that I expect, a certain amount of, for example, being able to draw in perspective, but it's not like, for example, the 2D prop we do, I'm not expecting every student to have to do that. If they're like, okay, I'm really uncomfortable with this, they can use 2D, of course. That's why the other chapters are for, the other example. So that's not a must, but I think that does help. Like, the sketching phase we do at the very beginning are just super ugly sketches. My sketches are also super ugly. They're just to get an idea out there. So I think that's all fine. I would say, I use quite a bit of Blender in this class. This is not a Blender class, but if you have any sort of beginning experience at Blender, I would say that's a plus. For example, Fusion 360, if you know the very basics, I only use the basics. So I go over them in one of the chapters, in like a tools chapter. I go over the basics that I use for Fusion. I think it's a good tool to try and, just mess around with for a bit. But for example, Fusion 360 is not like a tool you have to use in order to be able to complete this class, right? So those are things that help. but I don't think are necessary. But I would say maybe the basic of Blender to even get around in the program is a good idea. Maybe the basics of Fusion 360, just if you want to do a prop like that, is a good idea too. I don't know. What do you think? You agree with
No,
that,
I totally agree. Like, in terms of approach, like, yeah, you're right. If it's a case of super beginner, definitely get those foundations in place first, because although I believe you can still take stuff away from this, that allows you to take even more from this, maybe even the full intention of what you were teaching. But then at the same time, like with the way you mentioned about the props, like, you're absolutely right. You can approach it in 2D, but if that's something that is something that you're either having difficulty with or you're not feeling in particular, you can just use the 3D option. But both are super like valuable, and you can take it from there. And even like on the software side of things, because there's always the question of like which software is needed, and sometimes it's best to follow along with what's being taught, because certain things are difficult to replicate or might be a long way around to replicate in different packages. But with this course, like you mentioned with Fusion 360, it is possible to replicate that, I guess, all in Blender if you wanted to, with all the different add-ons you can get, or maybe more 3D or even another 3D package. But at the same time, because of the way you teach it, it's as long as you apply the methodology behind it and the reasoning behind it, then you should still get the same results.
Yeah, I agree. If you're a Maya user, in my opinion, you should be fine here. You know, there's anything crazy specific to Blender as far as I know. If you
and even like on the rendering side of things, like rendering, there's so many different packages, and there's always a debate like which one's the best one. But the way you do it in Blender, like I use Blender, but I don't use it for rendering as much. But then the way you break it down, and like I felt a bit annoyed with myself, like not using that beforehand, because of how easy you showcase it, because it's like it's super applicable, super clean workflow to even adopt. It's not a case of like, oh, I got to spend X amount of time getting familiar with all these different nodes and menus and stuff. It's just like, here you go. This is how simple it is. And even the way I work and how I use renders is very similar to how you use them. But my workflow is like, after seeing yours, is so crude compared to how you do it. So I'm definitely going to hijack that.
Okay, well, that's good, man. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, Wouter, thank you very much. I believe that's great note to end the podcast on. If this will be out when the course is already out, so please go check out Designing Better Characters. It's available right now. If you're lucky enough to get this if you're looking to get the course in the first 2 weeks after launch, it's available on an early bird discount. But nevertheless, it's such a great course. So please do check it out. Any final words from you, Wouter?
No, not really, man. But thanks for inviting me, and thanks for doing this. It was really fun to chat with you. So I enjoyed doing this, man. So, and you're very good at it. So thanks.
Dude. Anything else you'd like people to keep an eye out, to look out for in the future? I know you got your game and animation, but I guess that's still some time to realize. But anything else we can look forward to from you this year?
Like I don't, no, not really, except for on Twitter. I'm Wookie G on Twitter. I've started posting little clips of my game. So if you want to see how crappy it actually is and like what I'm doing, because I did this design of like I called it Billy Bob Ballbot. It's like this little ball robot. Yep. That's what I'm making my game of. So
really?
It's going to be
nice.
all procedural animated, and you can attach different limbs and like. Anyway, I'm having a lot of fun with it. So if anyone's interested in seeing what I'm doing, then I've been posting little clips of it on just on Twitter for now. So, but that's it. Other than that, like, you guys don't need to look into me any further.
Cool. We'll add those links up in the show notes. So whether you listen to it on Spotify or wherever else, look in the description and you'll see all the links there. Dude, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, man.
A huge thanks to Wouter for being our guest, and I really appreciate his honest insights. His course, Designing Better Characters, is out now. As ever, the first lesson is free, so head on over to learnsquared.com and start creating iconic characters from scratch. Till next time.